Something is wrong in Indianapolis. Not the kind of wrong that gets buried in a mid-season press release or smoothed over by a feel-good media day quote. The kind of wrong that shows up in cold, public, undeniable data. The kind of wrong that makes every sports executive in America quietly pull up the numbers and start asking uncomfortable questions about their own organizations. The Indiana Fever are struggling to sell tickets. Read that again, because it should not be possible. This is the franchise that couldn't keep seats available long enough to refresh the page in year one. The organization that watched the secondary market go absolutely nuclear in year two, with scalpers operating at levels usually reserved for championship runs and playoff eliminations. The team with the single most powerful individual ticket driver women's professional basketball has ever produced, still on its active roster, healthy, eligible, and entering what should be the prime of her professional career. And they are sending tweet after tweet, poll after poll, push notification after push notification, practically pleading with fans to please come through the turnstile before the season even tips off. Preseason seats priced at $280 are sitting there. The home opener against the Dallas Wings has entire sections still available. Upper deck spots are listed above $100 and nobody's rushing to claim them. Middle sections are running $300 to $400. Seats directly behind the bench are priced at $700 to $900. Those are not WNBA prices. Those are big market NBA premium franchise numbers, and they are being charged by an organization that finished 10-34 after their franchise player went down with an injury last season. The math doesn't work, the logic doesn't hold, and the explanation the organization and its defenders want to reach for, the economy, inflation, the cost of travel, the price of a hotel in Indianapolis, that explanation collapses the moment you put it under real scrutiny. Something else happened here, something specific, something damaging, and something that was entirely preventable. And if you've been watching this situation develop and felt like something is fundamentally broken inside that organization, you are not wrong. Because what we're unpacking today goes much deeper than a slow box office. This is a case study in how fast a franchise can destroy what took years to build, and what that destruction means for the future of an entire sports growth era. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers tell the first part of this story better than anything else. Year one of the Caitlin Clark era in Indiana wasn't just a commercial success, it was a phenomenon. Tickets sold out in minutes, not hours, not days, minutes. The secondary market entered a frenzy that women's professional basketball had never witnessed before. People were paying multiples of face value just to get inside the building. Fans were flying in from multiple states away, booking hotels across the street from Gainbridge Fieldhouse, arranging time off work, pulling their kids out of school, all for the chance to watch one player in person. That wasn't standard sports enthusiasm. That was something closer to a cultural moment, the kind that builds franchise legacies and reshakes the commercial possibilities of an entire sport. Year two was nearly identical. Demand still dramatically outpaced supply. Scalpers were still operating at a level that made casual observers do a double take. The Indiana Fever had the most sought-after seats in the league for any game in any conference. The Caitlin Clark effect in its full, unfiltered, and economically undeniable expression. Now compare that to where things stand today. The same seats that fans were fighting over a year ago are waiting to be claimed. The same organization that couldn't process transactions fast enough is now running social media campaigns, trying to generate urgency that the market is not naturally producing. And the pricing structure they've maintained through all of this isn't helping. $280 for a preseason game. A preseason game, a glorified scrimmage where coaches are testing rotations, starters are playing limited minutes, and the outcome is entirely irrelevant to the standings. Fans looked at that number and made a completely rational decision. They said no.
The organization will reach for economic conditions as the explanation, and to be fair, the economic pressures on American households are real. Inflation has squeezed budgets. The combined cost of flights, hotels, meals, and 4 tickets represents a meaningful financial commitment for any family navigating this environment. None of that is fabricated, and it would be intellectually dishonest to pretend economic pressure plays zero role in discretionary entertainment spending decisions.
But here's the problem with using the economy as the primary explanation. The economy was also rough last year. Inflation was still a dominant national conversation. Costs were elevated in every category when fans were lining up to pay those same premium prices without a second thought. If economic conditions haven't dramatically worsened since last year's sellouts, then the economy cannot explain a swing of this magnitude. Something changed. And when you look honestly at what that something is, it points directly back to decisions made inside one organization, decisions made by the Indiana Fever. Trust is a currency. In sports, in business, in any exchange where you're asking someone to hand over real money for a promised experience, trust is what closes the deal. It builds slowly, through consistent and reliable delivery of exactly what was promised, and it gets destroyed quickly, sometimes irreparably, by a single season of feeling used. The Indiana Fever spent last season systematically spending down their trust account, withdrawal after withdrawal, with no deposits in between. And the collapse in ticket demand showing up right now is not bad luck. It is the direct, predictable, and entirely preventable consequence of treating your most committed fans like they didn't matter, and then expressing surprise when they stopped showing up. Here's how it happened, because the sequence matters enormously. This wasn't one explosive scandal that could be dismissed as an isolated mistake. It was a slow accumulation of decisions, each one chipping away at the confidence fans had that this organization would deliver on the promise it had made. When Clark went down with her groin injury last season, the Fever's communication strategy was incoherent at best and deliberately manipulative at worst. She was listed as day-to-day, then day-to-day again. ESPN began circulating August 12th as a projected return date, and fans who had been carefully tracking these updates, planning trips, booking hotels, arranging schedules around her potential return, held on to that date like a lifeline. Then she became a game-time decision. Then, after a practice session, head coach Stephanie White confirmed that Clark hadn't even been practicing, and suddenly the game-time decision became out indefinitely. The goalposts didn't just move once, they moved repeatedly, and the fans absorbing these shifts weren't casual observers streaming games from their couch. These were the most invested people in women's basketball, individuals who flew to Indianapolis from 3 states away, families who booked hotels specifically across the street from the arena, parents who told their children they were going to watch Caitlin Clark play live, who then had to stand in a building where Clark wasn't on the floor and find a way to explain why. These were the exact fans who built the Indiana Fever's sellout reputation, the people who made the secondary market explode and turned the franchise into the hottest brand in the WNBA. And the organization dangled Clark's imminent return in front of them like a marketing asset, sustaining ticket interest just long enough to collect the money, then pulling the timeline back after the transactions had already cleared. The pattern repeated across the back half of the season. A signal would emerge suggesting Clark was close to returning. Tickets for upcoming games would move. Then the timeline would shift again. Another day-to-day. Another "she needs a couple more weeks." Another statement worded with just enough suggestion of progress to keep fans emotionally engaged without committing to anything concrete or verifiable. The difference between "we genuinely don't know her return timeline" and actively implying an imminent return to sustain sales momentum is a meaningful one. Fans are perceptive. They track these patterns. They compare notes. And by the end of last season, a substantial portion of the Fever fanbase had reached a specific conclusion, that the organization was managing their expectations strategically, not communicating with them honestly.
That conclusion, whether fully accurate or not, is the foundation of the trust collapse playing out right now. And here is what makes that conclusion so costly for the Fever heading into a new season. Once fans believe an organization was stringing them along, nothing the organization says can immediately reverse that belief. Trust requires demonstrated evidence accumulated over time. A press conference cannot rebuild it. A new marketing campaign cannot rebuild it. Not even having Caitlin Clark healthy and active on the opening night roster can fully rebuild it, because fans remember. They remember booking the hotel. They remember the flight confirmation sitting in their inbox. They remember telling their kids what was coming and then watching that promise dissolve in real time. Those memories are now attached to every ticket purchase decision, and they are pushing fans toward a wait-and-see posture that is costing this organization in a very visible and very public way.
But the injury communication is only one layer of this, because even when Clark was healthy and on the floor, a meaningful portion of fans who made those trips, who paid those premium prices, who committed real time and real money to being in that building, walked away feeling like they hadn't gotten what they paid for. They paid to watch the player who had electrified college basketball for 4 straight years, the woman who could fill an arena by herself. What they watched instead was Clark running off-ball routes inside a controlled offensive system that appeared architecturally designed around the coaching staff's preferences rather than around what Caitlin Clark actually does best. They watched her setting screens. They watched other players handling the ball in situations where Clark's creation ability should have been the engine driving the entire offense. They watched, as fan after fan described it, a system where the most dynamic playmaker in women's basketball was being used as a supporting character in someone else's story. This is not purely emotional fan frustration. There is a legitimate basketball argument embedded in these observations. Clark's defining strengths are very specific. Her shooting range forces defenses to extend dramatically, creating driving lanes and mid-range opportunities for everyone around her. Her passing vision collapses double teams and produces wide-open looks for teammates who know how to move without the ball. Her pick-and-roll playmaking operates at a level no defender in the league has consistently solved. All of these qualities reach their full potential when she has the ball in her hands and is functioning as the primary decision-maker on every possession. When you run her primarily as an off-ball wing inside a structured set offense, you are not just underutilizing her, you are actively suppressing the capabilities that make her a generational talent. Knowledgeable fans watched that and felt a specific kind of frustration. Fans who couldn't articulate the X's and O's felt the exact same thing intuitively because the game looked slower and less explosive than anything they had been expecting, and the scoreboard confirmed it night after night. You pay NBA prices, you get a product that feels like someone deliberately turned the volume down on the player you came to see. That is a transaction that doesn't leave people excited to make again. If the injury mismanagement and on-court usage issues damaged the foundation of fan trust last season, the decisions made this offseason cracked that foundation further in ways that are still reverberating. The Fever signed 8 guards. 8 guards! On a roster that already features the best point guard in women's basketball, operating at the highest level of playmaking efficiency the sport has witnessed in years. The front office's response to having Caitlin Clark is to bring in more perimeter players and add another layer of guards to a position that was already accounted for at the highest possible level? The logic of that construction does not explain itself, and the organization has not offered a compelling explanation to fans trying to understand what the vision actually is. Then came the draft and the selection of Raven Johnson at the 10th overall pick, a move that addressed a position already covered on the roster while leaving the size and defensive versatility needs that plagued the team last season entirely unresolved.
Fans who had watched the Fever get physically dominated in stretches throughout the previous year, who went into the draft specifically hoping to see those structural weaknesses addressed, watched instead as the organization added yet another perimeter player and deprioritized the physical upgrades that seemed obvious to anyone who had been paying attention. The cumulative picture these roster decisions paint is of an organization that believes deeply in its own process, regardless of what external evidence, analytical observation, and fan sentiment are telling it. An organization operating as though the feedback loop between the product it puts on the floor and the fans deciding to invest in that product simply doesn't exist. And then came the words, because in many ways, the words did more lasting damage than any single roster construction choice. Amber Cox raised the possibility of minute restrictions on Clark heading into the new season, framed around long-term player health management. That framing is theoretically defensible in isolation. Player load management is a real conversation across professional sports, but it lands like a gut punch to a fan base already frustrated by watching their franchise player spend significant stretches last season on the bench with an injury. The immediate fan question is not philosophical, it is financial. Are we being asked to pay $700 to watch Caitlin Clark play 25 minutes a night? Is that the product we're purchasing?
And then Stephanie White, rather than offering reassurance to a fan base whose confidence was already fragile, chose a different approach entirely. She stated publicly that she has 25 years of coaching experience on Clark and therefore understands the game at a level that Clark does not yet possess. That may be accurate as a biographical statement. Stephanie White has been coaching professional basketball since before Clark was in middle school. But as a message to send to a fan base that is actively and loudly questioning your judgment about how that player is being used, it is one of the most counterproductive things a coach could possibly communicate. You don't respond to a trust crisis by asserting that your authority is beyond question. That is precisely how you confirm the concern that the organization values its own internal hierarchy more than the product it delivers to the people paying to watch. And then there is Lynn Dunn. When fans began voicing these concerns across social media, not vague emotional complaints, but specific evidence-based criticism about roster construction decisions, player usage philosophy, and organizational priorities, Dunn's response was to characterize those critics as complainers. Not engaged stakeholders raising legitimate questions, not passionate investors in the franchise expressing understandable frustration based on documented experience. Complainers. Fans who had collectively and financially transformed the Indiana Fever from a struggling franchise into a nationally relevant, commercially valuable brand were told, in summary, that their concerns were noise to be managed rather than signals worth hearing. This organizational dynamic has a precedent that every sports business case study eventually references. When Steve Cohen publicly suggested that New York Mets fans weren't spending generously enough at the stadium, the fan base did not respond by opening their wallets wider. They responded by making themselves absent. Attendance declined, engagement dropped. Fans delivered the most eloquent possible rebuttal in the only language that organizational leadership genuinely processes. You think we're the problem? Watch what happens when we decide not to show up. The Indiana Fever are standing at the exact same inflection point right now. By dismissing criticism rather than absorbing it, by labeling engaged fans as complainers rather than acknowledging that their frustration reflects real and documentable organizational failures, the Fever front office has effectively communicated to its most invested supporters that their perspective is not just unwelcome but irrelevant. And fans are delivering the same message Mets fans delivered, not with words, with empty seats and closed wallets, and a wait-and-see posture that is making itself visible in a very public way during the most important commercial stretch of the off-season.
Here's where this story connects to something considerably larger than one team's box office performance. The WNBA is currently navigating what may be the most consequential period in its entire history. Television deals are growing in value at a rate that would have seemed entirely unrealistic 5 years ago. Franchise valuations have climbed dramatically. The Golden State Valkyries expansion franchise sold for a reported $50 million, a figure that would have been dismissed as fantasy not long ago. The league is in the early stages of collective bargaining negotiations that will shape player compensation structures for the next decade, and the central argument for substantially higher player salaries rests on demonstrated market demand. Filled arenas, strong viewership numbers, robust merchandise sales, franchise stability, and commercial momentum. What the Indiana Fever are demonstrating right now is a cautionary data point inside that larger, still developing narrative. The Caitlin Clark effect is not a permanent atmospheric condition that hangs over the franchise regardless of how the organization chooses to operate. It is a conditional relationship between a fan base and an organization. When the organization fulfills its side of that relationship, maximizing their star, communicating with honesty, making decisions that signal genuine commitment to winning, fans respond with exactly the level of investment that makes the WNBA's growth argument so commercially compelling. When the organization breaks that relationship, the fans withdraw. And partially empty sections at a Clark home game are precisely the kind of data point that potential investors, franchise buyers, league-level sponsors, and CBA negotiators are watching with significant concern. This is not an abstract observation. This directly affects the financial trajectory of a league that is still in the middle of building the infrastructure that will sustain its next generation. The commercial damage extends directly into the Fever's own sponsorship ecosystem. Companies partnering with the Indiana Fever are paying for the association with Caitlin Clark's audience reach and the visibility that comes from playing inside a packed arena. When sections are empty, the conversion data those sponsors use to justify their investment starts to look different. When fans are publicly declaring they are waiting rather than buying, the audience engagement metrics that brands rely on to measure ROI start to fluctuate in uncomfortable directions.
The Fever are not just leaving ticket revenue on the table. They are potentially weakening the entire commercial infrastructure that Clark's arrival was supposed to fortify for the long term. And that weakening has consequences that extend well beyond Indianapolis. What needs to happen now is neither complicated nor mysterious. Let Caitlin Clark play. Not on a minute restriction that turns a $700 ticket into a gamble. Not in a system engineered around the coaching staff's philosophical preferences rather than the player's extraordinary capabilities. As the offensive engine she was designed to be. As the primary decision-maker who generates the specific kinds of actions that no defense in this league has consistently solved. The product fans are paying for is not a managed, load-limited version of Caitlin Clark operating within a system designed to validate the people coaching her. The product is Caitlin Clark unleashed. Build the offense around that reality, and the results on the scoreboard will follow. Communicate honestly when her health becomes a factor, even when the honest answer is uncomfortable, even when saying, "We don't know her timeline and we won't speculate until we do," means fewer tickets move in the short term. Fans can handle uncertainty far better than they can handle the feeling of being managed. The fans who flew to Indianapolis last season, who booked the hotel, who made the trip, did not walk away angry that Clark was hurt. They walked away feeling like the organization had used their hope as a sales tool and then collected the money before the truth became unavoidable. That specific feeling is what cannot happen again. And acknowledge publicly, specifically, and without deflection that decisions made last season contributed to the erosion of trust that is now showing up in box office numbers. Not the economy,
not complainers, not external factors that conveniently remove the organization from the equation. The decisions, the communication choices, the roster construction logic that left serious questions unanswered, the public statements that responded to legitimate criticism by dismissing the people raising it. Fans who feel genuinely seen and respected are remarkably willing to move forward. They do not require perfection. They require honesty and the demonstrated belief that the organization is actually trying. What they will not do is continue investing financially and emotionally in an organization that responds to their documented concerns by making them the problem. The empty seats at Gainbridge Fieldhouse are not a mystery. They are a message, clear, specific, and delivered in the language organizational leadership understands most fluently. Lost revenue, empty rows, social media campaigns begging for engagement that should be generating itself. The Indiana Fever built something genuinely rare in years 1 and 2, a fan base that was emotionally all in, people who weren't just buying tickets but were buying into a story, a franchise, a future. That kind of investment from fans does not appear automatically. It is earned through consistent, honest, and genuine delivery of the experience that was promised. And once it is broken, it cannot be restored through marketing. It cannot be restored through a press release or a new jersey reveal or a hype video posted 3 weeks before opening night. It can only be restored through actions, sustained over time, that give fans actual concrete reasons to believe the organization has changed. The players who made this era possible are watching. The league is watching. The sponsors, the investors, the negotiators building the commercial case for the next chapter of women's professional basketball are watching. And the fans who built the sellout record in years 1 and 2, the ones who flew in, booked the hotels, brought their families, and made the Indiana Fever into something genuinely meaningful, they are watching too, from home, with their wallets closed, waiting to find out if this organization finally actually deserves their trust again. The answer to that question won't come from a tweet. It won't come from a ticket promotion. It will come from what happens on the floor, in the front office, and in the way this organization chooses to treat the people whose belief made all of this possible in the first place. The seats are empty. The message has been sent. The only question left is whether anyone in Indianapolis is actually listening.